Hi, thanks for joining us at whatthechuck.net. Today's training will be provided on the latest version of Office 365. If you like what you see, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for upcoming videos that are on the way. Thanks. Hi, I'm Chuck, and today we're going to be going over pivot tables in Excel. A little background on me. I'm a certified PMP or project management professional from certifications from the Project Management Institute. I have spent most of my career in the implementation slash services delivery area. I worked for many years for a couple of uh, software development companies that produce software in the K-12 education arena. So what I want to do, I've seen a lot of Excel training videos out there. I want to try to produce some real world scenarios from the services side. A lot of the work that I did in the past was, related to revenue recognition. Work very closely with our accountants, and there are times when I need to see kind of where I am with the goals or the deadlines that have been put on me for fiscal reasons. And one of the things that you want to do is you want to be able to see, hey, I've got this goal. Uh, where am I right now? How far do I have to go to get to that goal? And you really don't want to wait till fourth quarter to find out. I'm going to come up a little short. So I'm going to show you some of the ways that I use pivot tables, along with some other features of Excel to kind of keep myself up to date, be able to report information when it's requested of me, and so forth. So the first thing that we're going to start with is we're going to talk a little bit about the data. The biggest thing about the data is it's got to be accurate. It doesn't matter how powerful your tool is. If the data that you're using is not up to date, then the results are going to be not up to date. So just keep in mind that old rule is garbage in, garbage out. You got to have good data. Now, in at certain times on specific projects that I would work on, it was very simple just to open up Excel, create a little spreadsheet, and kind of track it manually, and that's fine if that's what you're going to want to do. But in the things that I was doing, I was dealing with spreadsheets that were anywhere from 6 to 10,000 rows long, and that's a lot of data to try to keep up to date. So one of the first things that I figured out that it's a lot easier, if your data is in some program in a database somewhere. And with me, I had a team of people that worked for me, and they were all hitting the database at the same time. But it's a lot easier to put your data in one spot and then just use the Excel and pivot table features to kind of report that information. So what I had done was um, the software that we used at any given time, a lot of the things that I needed to report were not readily available as a push button report. So what we did, depending on the software, was that I would either set up some type of an ODBC connection where I could hit the data directly, or I wrote some type of a query that pulled the data out in the same format every time I wanted to use it. So what I would do is I would pull that data out, and then I would come back to my spreadsheet that you kind of see here, and I would just paste that updated data in this sheet, which would then in turn uh, refresh my pivot tables, and all my data would be up to date as at that moment. Now, one of the things I want to show you about the data that we're looking at on the screen now, you're going to see data that has white background, and you're going to see data that has kind of a, depending on your monitor, it may be yellow or it may be cream color. The difference is the data in the cream color to the right of this data set contains manual formulas that I put in the data after it was populated to help me with some things that I needed to track that wasn't necessarily captured in my database. So the data that has the white background, this came from an export. When I press the button in my database, it pulls this data out every single time in the exact same format. I come to this screen, I paste the data, and then I come over here and I refresh my formulas, and then my data is up to date. And we're going to get into that a little bit more detail here shortly. So in this example, I'm just copying a few pieces of information. I track a project number, um, when the order actually came in, an order number, PO number. I've made up customer names. I'm just using customer 1 through 5. And then I've made up cities and states. Product training. This is, since we're going to be tracking the delivery of training, I've just made up some names for this. There's some analytic trainings, WP, maybe word processing, presentation, database, and so forth. So don't get too caught up in the names of the products. This is the quantity of in this example, the quantity of analytic training sessions that we're going to do. This is the individual price. So these would be uh, one session of training is $1,000. In this case, it's two. Here's our total. Um, I've got about 5 trainer names listed that, again, I just made those up. When the training was delivered and the status. There are a few fields in here that, just in the interest of data entry, I created some drop-down lists so I could just pick names so I didn't have to type so much, and the same for status. Now, over on the right, these are the fields that I added additional formulas and data that I needed to track. One of the things that I wanted to do, this trainer percentage lookup field, if you look over here, I created a small table that has the trainer's name and, as far as their compensation, what percentage of the total price do they get paid. So I've used a VLOOKUP to just come over here and grab that. And that way when I refresh this data, I can just fill that formula down and it'll constantly tell me, in this example, Ralph Stone, he gets 30% of the total amount, and I think everybody else gets 25%. This other little table here, I just used that to create my drop-down list for the status of the training. So let's talk about a pivot table. What is a pivot table? A pivot table is a tool that will allow you to analyze or organize extremely large amounts of data. If you look at this data set that I have on the screen, it's only about 59 rows. But as I was kind of mentioned earlier, uh, for me, when I was dealing with data sets that were, 6, 8, 10,000 lines long, it's really difficult to just eyeball this. Sure, I could insert some auto sum totals and things like that. But if I really want to break this data down and analyze it and use it for practical purposes that are going to help me in my daily job, I need something more powerful. So the first thing that we're going to do in order to create a pivot table, you have to select your data set. Now, you could, as long as you're selected at least one cell in the data set, you could click insert and hit pivot table, and that's fine, and it's going to accomplish the same thing. But what I like to do is I like to manually select my data. And if you don't know how to do that, Control Shift right arrow and then Control Shift down arrow, and that'll take you to the bottom of your data set. Now, since my data set is going to be growing over time, I don't want to have to reset my data area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go down to the bottom of the sheet, and that's going to take us to the very, very bottom of the sheet. And as we add data, um, we don't have to go back and mess with the properties of the pivot table. So there is a formula that you can put in to tell your pivot table to grow the data set automatically, but it's going to be a little bit outside of the scope of this video. We may get that a little later. So once we've selected our data, I'm going to click on the Insert tab on the ribbon, and I'm going to choose pivot table. And it's only going to ask you a couple of things. It's going to get you to kind of confirm your range of data. And then it's going to ask you, do you want to create this pivot table on a new worksheet, or do you already have a sheet set up that you want to put it on? So for this one, and most of the ones that I do, I always choose new worksheet, and then I'm going to click OK. Okay, so this is the default view of an empty pivot table. You're going to see several pieces of information over here on the right. If you notice all these field names, they're going to match your header or the field columns that you had in your data set. Now, one thing that you need to know, you have to have a header in your data for the pivot table. In addition, you cannot have a column that's blank, either by the header or the whole column cannot be blank. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have blanks inside your data set. If you've got all of these, but maybe this trainer is not assigned yet and it's blank, that's fine. But the entire column cannot be blank and it has to have a header. So looking back over here, one of the examples that I wanted to do uh, in kind of staying true to what we were talking about earlier with revenue recognition, I want to set up a pivot table that shows me um, based on quarter and potentially based on month, how much revenue I've recognized to this point, and how much revenue may be scheduled to be delivered in the future. And since it's January 18th today, so we're most likely going to be dealing with data from 2018 and possibly 2017. So the first thing that I'm going to do, um, I'm going to use the product training field just to kind of help us visualize exactly what type of training that we've scheduled and delivered. And if you remember from the example when we were looking at the data set, we had database training, analytics training, presentation training, and you're going to notice as soon as I drag the product training into the row box at the bottom, uh, this is the data that's going to show up on multiple rows if you have multiple um, products. The next thing I want to do is, what do we want to look at? We want to look at the revenue. So I'm going to come down to the total field and I'm going to drop this in values. Okay, so I'm going to stop right here now that you've seen something on the screen. Anything that we want to appear on the left hand side going down column A is going to go in the row box. Anything related to revenue that we want to show to the corresponding product, we're going to drag that in the value. Value is typically going to be some type of number. Now, this is good information if I'm just looking for totals, but that really doesn't help me. I could have just done a regular if statement or count if statement or something like that in the real data to see that. So what I'm really looking for is I want to know when each of these dollars of revenue were delivered based on our fiscal year. Okay, so I'm going to take the delivery date field. This is when we delivered. Each row is a piece of data and each row has a specific delivery date in my example. I'm going to drop that in the column field. And what that does, anything that you put in the columns area is going to be displayed horizontally. So right now, we've got data from 2017, 18, 19, 2099, and we've got one that's less than January of 2017. Okay, so right off the top, we're going to delete or hide this. This is because I've intentionally left one of the fields in my data set blank. And this is just like any other Excel filter. We can click this and I'm going to remove that. an easier way to do this is just select all, take the checkbox off, and we're really just going to look at 2018 right now. Now you'll notice that we're showing the year, but we really can't see the months. Well, anytime you see a plus next to a field up in this area, you can click the plus and it's going to break it down by the quarters. And then if you click the plus by the quarters, it's going to break it down by the month. You can also right click in this area and go down to expand collapse. You can collapse one quarter at a time, or you can collapse the entire field, which is all the quarters. Actually, I did expand. Let's do collapse. And it's a quick way um, without having to go and click, 8 times. Now for me, um, this is a lot of information and the headings kind of confuse things. So what I typically do, unless I'm looking for something specific, I typically keep all these guys closed and I look at it one quarter at a time. At least in what I was doing for tracking my data, um, I didn't really care too much about the month until I got toward the end of the year when I'm trying to figure out, hey, how am I going to meet this goal? It's November. There's a holiday in December for Christmas. There's a holiday in November for Thanksgiving. A lot of people tend to get uh, less energetic as it gets close to the Christmas holidays. So, for me planning, what can I do to make sure I'm hitting my goals? Now, once you get the pivot table um, set up and ready to go, I always try to format my data. For this, just so that you can see it, I'm going to go ahead and open these again. Um, I'll usually put borders on the cells so that they're easier to see. Um, I always center my column headers so that again it's easier to read. Another thing I do is some people change the numbering format so the dollar sign shows up. For me, I hate that. The dollar sign just kind of gets in the way. It's an extra character you got to read, and we know that it's money. So I typically just use the comma separator, and also I'll move my decimal point over 2 places because when you get up, in the kind of work that I was doing, when you get up to, $1 million, nobody cares that it's $1.25. So we want this to be as neat and as clean as possible. Um, but what I would do is I would use tables, a pivot table similar to this to track my progress. This number is redundant. So if I'm only looking at one fiscal year, maybe I want to go to pivot table options, totals and filters, and take that off. You can always go back and turn that back on if you're looking at multiple years because you're going to want to see the subtotal for um, 2018, 17, and so forth. So I'm going to bring that back. Another thing that you can do is you can use filters in addition to what's up here. So the difference between the two is that if I just looked at this pivot table and there was a lot of data here, um, I may not readily easily see what we are filtering. So I'm going to go ahead and add these back into the scenario. And we'll just close this just so that the data set's easy to read. And what I did, one of the extra fields that I created over here, I created a delivery year and a delivery month. And there's a formula for month, and I just pointed it at the delivery date, and there's a formula for year, and I pointed it at the delivery date. The thing is if you have, for example, the delivery date in a column or in a row, you can't put it in the filter section. It's going to move it. It's not going to copy it. So I'm going to take the delivery year and I'm going to drag it to my filters box, and it's going to put that filter at the top of the pivot table. Um, then I can just choose 2018 from up there. I can immediately see the filter and I can tell exactly what we're filtering for. So that's pretty easy. Uh, Not a great example for this, but if I wanted to put the delivery month too, I could. So maybe I only want to look at April. Let's do June for 2018. And if I open that up, guess what? It's June. Okay. Um, so that's pretty helpful there. Okay. So what we're looking at right now is all the revenue for 2018. So let's take this one step further. Um, we probably want to look at the status as a filter. And for my data, I had three statuses. I had that the training was complete, the training was scheduled, or the training was unscheduled. So if I'm doing revenue recognition, I really, I don't want to see unscheduled, and I almost never want to see blank. And so what this is doing is this is saying that after looking at the data, the pivot table is going to tell us that as long as nothing goes wrong, um, things get canceled, things get rescheduled, but as long as nothing goes wrong, this is the amount of money that we're going to recognize by the end of 2018. So if we had included the unscheduled, it could throw our numbers off because unscheduled is not scheduled or complete. Now, if let's say that today was June 1st of 2018, I could still say that this much revenue uh, can officially be recognized, once the audits take place and uh, the auditors determine that, this data is correct and, these things did get delivered. Okay, so let's take this one step further. So far we've created a pivot table that is showing us potential revenue recognition for the 2018 year. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to collapse this just so that it looks neater. Uh, Maybe we've got a little bit of a budget problem. And, let's say we have $20,000 total. And this is just a made-up number. It's not real. It probably wouldn't be real for this example, but let's say that we have $20,000 in our budget um, to pay the trainers as well as any expenses that are associated with their training. So one of the things we could do, we could go back over here to the data and we could recreate a new pivot table to kind of show us some of that information. But to make things easier, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to paste it. Okay, so right now we've got two identical pivot tables. Now, you want to be very careful when you do this. You'll notice that I've got a lot of stuff over here that has not been expanded, and your pivot table is going to grow. And when you put stuff to the right, actually more to the bottom, if I pasted this down here, you can run into problems where that pivot table is not able to grow. So be, be mindful that when you put these things out there, when you paste them, be mindful that you give yourself plenty of room to go around. So rather than recreating this pivot table, I'm going to take the one that I copied and pasted, and I'm just going to edit it. So for this example, um, we're not going to need product training. We're going to use trainer. And the trainer field is right here. And we're not going to use the sum of the total. we're going to use what the trainer gets paid, and that's based on a formula that I created on the data tab. Um, we don't really care about the delivery dates, and we also want to see what the expenses were. Okay, so right now our filters are still in place. We're still looking at scheduled and completed as far as status. We're looking at all the months, but we're only looking in 2018 because that's where, in this example, that's where we are right now. So this tells us that we have in trainer expenses, we owe them or have paid them $14,537. Now, we said a few minutes ago that we had a trainer budget of $20,000. We have expenditures of what we've paid the trainers plus the expenses, and we have, sorry, can't type, of 20,000 minus 14,000. Okay, so this is how much money we have left. And so if, once you create this table and you keep it up here, you may have like a dashboard sheet that has, charts, graphs, and setup information, things like that on it. But, it's just as simple as creating this. Now, let's just say that your total budget was 13,000. Very quickly, you can tell that you're over budget. So we're going to do a couple more examples. I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste it again. We talked about about completed and scheduled, but maybe we want to take this one step further. So we're in 2018. Maybe we want to see what's already on the books for 19 as far as revenue. So, all I've got to do is come up here and change that to 19. Uh, we don't want into the status filter. We don't want complete. We just want stuff that's scheduled. And now we can see that we've got $2,500 of word processing training scheduled for 2019 in quarter one in January. So that's something that's helpful. Maybe you want to get additional statistics on your trainers. So we can come back up here. I'm going to copy that, paste it down there. Maybe we do want to know how many training events that they've delivered. So um, over here, we're gonna we can either drag these off the page, or if it's easier because you've already highlighted them up here, you can find the field and just take the check mark off the label. But to me, it's easier just to do this. And we're going to pick up quantity, and for 2018, for every month for completed and scheduled, we don't want scheduled, we just want to know how many they've done. There's 36 days of or sessions of training. Now, if we wanted to, we still could come back up here and drop the delivery date in and find out, sorry, I went the wrong way, find out exactly when these trainings are going to take place. Sorry, I dropped that in the wrong place. So this was in January, February, March, April, May through December. Um, Go one step further. Maybe we want to know what state they were in. So for Alabama, Georgia, so we can very quickly see how many were in Alabama. If we want to look in more detail, we can see that there were um, two in January, one in February, and so forth. I just show you all these examples to say that the possibilities are almost endless. You can take one set of data and you can do multiple levels of reporting. Uh, if I wanted to say, maybe we would did want product. What kind of training was it? I'm going to drop that over here. So for analytics, you see every training event that each person did on analytics, what state it was in, and what month it was in. Um, and you can go back and choose, all the years. It really depends on what you're looking for, what you're trying to accomplish. So, um, I think we're going to kind of wrap this up. We're going to be doing some additional videos. I want to cover uh, charts, graphs, and some other things that kind of go hand in hand. Again, what I did was I had one tab with all my data on it. I may have one or more tabs with pivot tables on them, and then I would uh, had potentially one or more tabs um, that were kind of a dashboard, so that I could just open up, refresh my data, go to the dashboard tab, and my data is instantly there in graphical form. A lot easier to analyze. You can use it to create graphs to show trends, uh, or just check levels. This is where we were at this time in 2018, and this is where we are today in 2019, and you can kind of watch your progress throughout your project or projects, or if you do what I did, throughout your fiscal year. Thanks for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe on the channel, and you'll get notifications for future releases that are on the way. Thanks.